Maybe some more people will come in. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out to the Kinston North Council of the Library this evening. My name is Chris Nelson. I am the engagement librarian. I normally schedule programs at community library, awesome programs like this one. I want to thank Mr. Albert, from Suffolk Credit and Kinston Cares, and Ms. Yeager, who came all the way here from the other side of Greenville, 2.5 hours away. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce you, I'll let Mr. Albert introduce you, and I'll let you come up with Mr. Albert. Want to welcome everybody. Good evening. Thank you for coming out. Wanted to also thank the library who we're partnering with for hosting Ms. Yeager, and there will be more talks to come about Kinston's rich Black history. Not all about Lincoln City, but certainly quite a bit of it will probably be related to Lincoln City. I have some prepared remarks real quick, and then I'll get out of the way and let the expert historian, the amateur expert historian talk. So I met tonight's speaker several years ago at a Black Communities Conference in Durham. She was a presenter there, and I was looking over the program, and I was surprised to see something about Lincoln City, Kinston. And so, of course, I went to her workshop and talked to her afterwards and dreamed of what's happening today. This is how many years ago? But 2018. So I grew up in Northwest Kinston, graduated from Kinston High School in 1980, and knew nothing about Lincoln City until decades later. Can anybody hear me? Until decades later, when I came back to Kinston as an adult, my obsession with Lincoln City began years ago when I met Milton Pollock and Gary Dove of the Black Arts Guild. They produced an oral history called A Celebration of Lincoln City. And it's the only thing I've ever seen in print about this, I think, very important neighborhood of Kinston. I believe Lincoln City's history is very important to Kinston. It played a significant role in this town's economy and culture and was very different from other Black neighborhoods in town. Probably, and I'm not a historian, probably because the residents owned their homes and the land that their homes were built on. Most of the Black middle-class kids that I went to high school with, Darlene Wiggins, Gerald Jarman, Rita Joyner, all seem to have some kind of roots in this one Black neighborhood. And it's also the quintessential example of environmental racism. From its very inception, when in the late 1800s, a local white landowner decided to sell land to Blacks, he sold them flood-prone land down near the Neuse River. Lincoln City was founded by freed men and women of color and runaway slaves who came from across the region and probably from out of state. And I'll let Ms. Yeager, her presentation one of her presentations probably addresses that, perhaps not tonight's presentation. The town of Kinston eventually annexed the village. So unlike Princeville, which remained autonomous and independent and incorporated, Lincoln City got annexed into the city at some point. Later on, at some point, a railroad was built smack dab through the middle of the now neighborhood, I'm guessing, or it could have been through the village. I don't know that time frame. And later on, the city built not just a municipal landfill in the backfield of these Black residents, but then turned around and built a wastewater treatment plant in their backyards. So it's classic environmental racism. Tonight's talk is the first event and many to come in the next year. It's part of a new effort to engage residents in our community and invite them to envision new uses for the large flood buyout zone in Southeast Kinston. I actually brought one of our first maps. Is that messing up the recording? So the large green area is kind of the core of this large green space. But even the blue areas are the former neighborhoods that were bought out by Kinston. And then the dark blue areas were also part of at least 2 buyouts that the city engaged in the early 2000s. And then Lincoln City, you can see this faint black outline, and that's what tonight's talk is about. And Lincoln City really is the inspiration that gave rise to this project that's so new that it really doesn't even have a name. We're hoping to, again, engage the public. There's at least 1,300 acres inside the city limits that are vacant, are not being cared for by the city, who owns probably 95% or more of them. We think it's an opportunity. And so this project is about engaging the community and convincing the community that this is a worthwhile project and we can do something really positive, not only for East Kinston, but for our whole city. So Ms. Yeager, she retired from Elon College, where she worked for who knows how long as a librarian. She lives now in Oxford. Is that right? Reedsville. And I don't know who her folks are, but I heard her saying she was a Lewis. So Lewis was your maiden name, is that right? And tonight's talk is one of at least 3 research projects that she's turned into public presentations. We're hoping that we'll be able to invite her back to do the other 2 that she researched on her own as sort of an amateur historian, very much still interested in her neighborhood where she grew up. And anybody that I've ever talked to about Lincoln City, they're all very, very passionate about that neighborhood that nurtured them and really created them and supported them, especially through those Jim Crow years when life was so tough for people of color in this part of the world. So I'm going to stop there because that's where my little talk, I didn't have time to do anymore. Thank you all again for coming. I've got a sign-up sheet going around, and it's because we would love to inform you of future events that the public is welcome to attend. So if you sign that, put your phone number and email address, we'll have a way to contact you and let you know about what happens. Thank you again. Ms. Yeager.
Okay, thank you, Wade. So first of all, I just want to say a couple of things. Most people that I went to school with knew me by Harriet Lewis. It wasn't until I was in the 1st grade that I figured out my name was Harriet because everybody called me Jamane. So I just kind of love Jamane because that's what I know. I grew up in Lincoln City and I didn't realize until I was an adult how much I missed it and I missed the people. I grew up behind St. Peter's Church of Christ. So if anybody remembers that church on Lincoln Street, I was that house behind that church. Yes. Yes. And I couldn't skip church because I walked literally out the back door of my house into the yard of the church. So that was really hard to do. I'm a retired librarian. I spent 20 years at Elon University. And as a librarian, we look for factual information about topics. And so I don't have a lot of word of mouth information. I have found out that there are others before me that have been collecting information and treasures, and I look forward to exploring that. For those, I am forever grateful. I became interested in Lincoln City after I started working on my family tree. And, you know, we always hear this thing, we don't know where we're going if we don't know where we come from. So that kind of made me think more about Lincoln City and where I really came from. I started researching, especially after the floods in the 90s, Floyd and Fran. And I remember I was so upset when I was watching television and I saw Lincoln City underwater. Literally, tears were just running down my eyes. I knew that that place I call home was not the same. It would never be the same again. I pledged then that even though Lincoln City, as I knew it and my peers knew it, was gone, it would always be in my heart, and I was not going to let people forget about it. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write about and talk about it, because I didn't want people to forget about Lincoln City. In an effort to not forget about Lincoln City. In 2018, I did a presentation at the Black Communities Conference in Durham on Lincoln City and the Neuse River. Basically talk a lot about the floods that have been over the years. I followed that up in 2019 with 3 churches in Lincoln City, specifically 3 churches on Lincoln Street at that same conference. One last thing I want to say before I get much further. I want to apologize to the United American Fuel Baptist Church. It was not my intention to not talk about them before. The point, at the time, they were not on Lincoln Street, and I was just dealing with Lincoln Street. This presentation, however, does include them because it is more about Lincoln City and not just Lincoln Street. So first of all, I kind of combined these 2 presentations a little bit. So I want to talk about Lincoln City and the people first. And okay, wait a minute. My slide work. Oh, there it is. Got it. So in 1810, John Washington, town commissioner, spoke of a border from a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile on the inside of the Neuse River, which often subject to flooding. The soil of these flooded borders were poorer than any other along the rivers of the state. But he said it grew oak, gum, poplar, birch, and cypress trees. After reconstructions, many African Americans left the farms to come to the cities. They created their own communities, as we all know. As Jim Crow laws were introduced across the South from 1877 to the beginning of the civil rights movements, African Americans were segregated to certain parts of town, often on the poorest land available. In 1893, James A. McDaniel acquired 350 tracts of land adjoining the town of Kinston, east of the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. He built a home for his family, and he began selling up some of the land. What you see here is actual from his estate, and I'm going to tell you, I'm a very visual person sometimes. And that talks about lots that were sold to Lincoln City residents. And I think he died about 1928 or 27 or 28, because this is from the Estates on Wills from 1928. And I just thought it was fascinating because I've never seen anything like this before, that actually, lists the properties that were sold and stuff. So I just thought that was really cool. This is another one. This is his son down here that signed it, and his daughter that were left to sign this. But it all just talks about, the lots that were bought and the names of the people that bought them. And there's one thing that if people know or maybe not know, that West Street is now Oak Street, or became Oak Street. I found it out from doing this research. So in 1902, there was no place for African Americans to buy land of their own. And when they did, it was usually the worst land. Abraham Lincoln Barnett bought 3 lots from James McDaniel. The land was undeveloped, and because it lay north of the Neuse River and was prone to flooding. So they had to literally clear all these trees and stuff off the land to use the land. Once they cleared it off, they began to build homes on this land and cultivate it and do things that they were used to doing. It became a settlement. Because a lot of people had moved in there or were moving in there. Once it became big enough, the city of Kinston decided they had to name a street. And we've all probably heard this before, I'm sure. They chose Lincoln and named for Mr. Lincoln and made it Lincoln Street. And this community became Lincoln City. What I wanted to show you here was just that the red line that's running through here is that Lincoln City literally starts at Shine and comes down to the river. So it kind of goes across Shine Street and then down. This is a really showed Lincoln City, and this was like in 1925. That was the first instance that I could find of Lincoln City on the map. Change pages here. I had checked prior years, but there was no instance of it. And the Sanborn map is like a fire insurance map. They, if you had if you were, you want your house to burn down or something, they would insure it. Well, they kind of went around and surveyed all the land, and they created these maps. The second one is a little bit smaller inset of it, but you can actually see Lincoln City written out in here. So, as a historian or whatever, it just makes you feel good when you actually see something in writing, that says, oh, okay, we existed. All right, so the other thing I wanted to talk to just a second about is the schools. So when I was coming along, I didn't know any of this stuff. So in 1906, Mr. Barnett gave some of his land to build a school, elementary school, and it was named Lincoln City Colored School or Lincoln City Elementary School. I've seen both names. So Mr. McDaniel gave the land for the school on East Shine Street. And I found out later that it was the old white school that moved, I think, further away. And then there's Kinston College, which was established about 1902 and is an affiliate of the United American Free Will Baptist Church. So for a long time, those were the only schools that were here. And this image right here really touched me. It is the Kinston College that flooded in like 1924. And I just thought I wanted to share it. Okay, so now we get to the other part, what you really came for. Churches and more. And I'll tell you about the and more in a second. So I tried to put these, they're not really in alphabetical order, but I just put them there. So there's Antioch Free Will Baptist Church, St. Peter Church of Christ, a Tabernacle Holy Church, Emmanuel Chapel Christian Church, the Central Star Christian Church, the United Free Will Baptist Tabernacle, and more is the Cedar Grove Cemetery, because I couldn't figure out where to put it. But it was the only Black cemetery at the time, and I thought that it was significant that we have it here. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about Antioch. As long as I can remember, this church has been sitting where it is right now, and it has always been white. The building's always been white. I've never seen another color. So it's just interesting that as long as I can remember, that's what it looks like. So Antioch was organized in the home of the late John Sutton on University Street in 1909. The first sanctuary moved to Kinston College and was built on the site of the United American Free Will Baptist Tabernacle. The charter members were late P.H. Graham, Reverend J. Isler, Deacon James Amos Jones, and Deacon Duffy Humphrey. I'm not going to read all of this. There were a number of pastors over the years from 1911 all the way to 1924. I do want to talk about from 1916 to 1924 though, because Reverend J.R. Brady became their pastor. And they were telling me, the lady that told me this said that he moved Antioch from University Street to 820 Lincoln Street, which is where it is now. A frame church was built on that lot first. And then in 24 through 30, 37, actually, there were more preachers. There's the other part that was fascinating to me, was from 1937 to 1949, Reverend L.E. Raspberry was the pastor. And the parishioners thought of him as the Moses of Antioch. He led them out of the wilderness, is what I was told. And so in March 1942, the foundation was laid for the new church. In May of 1942, they began building the church. And the stones were actually hand wrung on machines on the site, and then they were set aside to dry. And I just thought that was like, wow. I can't imagine that. In May 1943, Pastor Reverend Raspberry and visiting members of Lincoln City churches marched from Faith Tabernacle to the new church. And here's the present day church. Still looks the same. It just still looks the same, which is cool, but it looks the same. Reverend Gregory S. Nissick is the pastor. Faith Tabernacle. I remember this church so vividly. This is the old church, of course. In 1904, Reverend Laura Isler and mothers Nancy Bright, Sally Cogdell, and others founded Faith Tabernacle Holy Church. In 1911, Bishop G.J. Branch of Goldsboro was one of the founders of the United Holy Church of America. He erected the first building with timber from his farm. And it was on land that was donated by Deacon and Sister Brian Cogdell. The building was located at 618 Lincoln Street. It became known as the Church on the Hill, and it did sit up higher, I remember. And it was named Faith Tabernacle Holy Church. Bishop Branch, founding father and leader, served Faith Tabernacle for nearly 40 years until his death in 1949. Then there was a 10-year span when they had two pastors, R.H. Jackson from Henderson and Elder L.R. Rebels from Goldsboro. In 1959, Reverend Samuel Clemens of Goldsboro was assigned as pastor of Faith Tabernacle. And I remember him because he was there when I used to go there. Land was purchased from Mr. William Beach at 400 South Athens Street for a new building. And in 1972, the ground was broken for the new building. On February 8th, 1976, the final service was held at Faith Tabernacle. Pastor Clemens and the congregation led the march to the new church, and they were singing, "We come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord." In 2004, Bishop Clemens announced his retirement after 45 years. And then the convocation that same year, Elder Robbie E. Millard was assigned as pastor of Faith Tabernacle United Holy Church. Oops, sorry. I had too much United there. Sorry, didn't mean that. But anyway, he is the present pastor. And then it's the present church. St. Peter Church of Christ. This is the past church, and if you really looked like to your straight back, my house was right behind it. It was right behind that church. This is from 1943 to 1975. It was in this building. It goes back to the 1870s. It was it was a part of let me go back. It was founded in the early 1870s under a bush shelter by a few disciples in Lincoln City. And my friend Sheila and I remember Miss Edna's faith. So So she told was that her grandfather and grandmother were older founders of the church. There were Reverend Whitfield and Elder Hill and Elder Frazier and Elder Hargett were early pastors during the bush shelter years. And there's somewhere in here I missed it because I didn't exactly understand what a bush shelter was. So somebody had to explain to me because it was wooded. They literally were taking the wood, they cut the wood down and made a shelter out of it, and that became the church. And
Like a lean-to.
yeah, it was wow, yeah. But you know, our generation, we never saw anything like that, so it was different. I really didn't know what it was. Her grandparents mortgaged their place to help build St. Peter. Her grandmother was one of the oldest mothers of the church. And they said that in the bush shelter church days, pioneers John Williams, Ned Lofton, and John Miller were active in working to build a stronger church. About 1890, St. Peter moved out of the bush shelter into a permanent building. It says near Oak Creek Branch in Lincoln City. Kind of confused about that one a little bit. Over the next several decades, membership in the church flourished. In 1945, S.W.R. Keyes became the pastor. He served in this position until his resignation in November 1983. He's the only pastor I remember at St. Peter. So that's the only one I can remember. In 2000, St. Peter moved to the new church, and the current pastor is Reverend Tyrone Amy. And this is St. Peter Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ today. Now, I remember we used to sit, when we were young, we had to sit upstairs in the balcony, and the bell was like in a tower or something. We used to love for it. Rarely did they ring it, but we just wanted them to ring that bell so bad. You know, kids, you know how we are. So, like I said, I did not want to leave the United African Free Will Baptist church or denomination out at this time, because they were a big part of Lincoln City and have been for a very long time. So about 1900, roughly, Kinston College was built on this, at this place, United American Free Will Baptist Tabernacle. So what I did find out, there's still more that I need to learn, but the United American Free Will Baptist Church is the oldest national body of predominantly African American Free Will Baptists. And it also called the United American Free Will Baptist denomination. African Americans organized their separate congregation at Shady Grove Free Will Baptist Church in Snow Hill in 1867, and I did not learn that until this week. Inspired by Shady Grove's, others formed churches. The first annual conference was organized in 1870. The first association was in 1887, and the first general conference was in 1901. And then in 1902, Kinston College was founded in Lincoln City. The headquarters and the tabernacle are in Kinston, which I kind of think I knew part of that. There's estimated 75, and I left this part off, to 100,000, 75,000 to 100,000 members in about 500 churches. And the United American Free Will Baptist Church is a member of the National Fraternal Council of Negro Churches, and Bishop J.E. Reddick currently serves as the general bishop. The other thing I found out that I didn't get to put up here, when I was doing my research, I found out that the majority of the United Free Will, I was gonna mess it up. United American Free Will Baptist denomination is in North Carolina because it originated in North Carolina. And So there are a lot of Free Will Baptist churches that under this denomination. So like I said, I learn something all the time. So this is the other part that I did want to include. Besides the churches, I had an encounter, well, it wasn't an encounter. I was reading an article that some students wrote after Floyd, and I got really upset because in this article, they made it seem like everybody that lived in Lincoln City was either on welfare or something to that effect. And I was just angry, I just got angry about it. So when I did my presentation that you missed, this is one of the things I did. I literally went back at the census and I looked at the city directories to find out the occupations of the people that live in Lincoln City. And you were right about two things. Well, exactly one, I know, a lot of people did own their own homes. So that was a misnomer I just thought was awful. And so I went back and looked and just kind of wrote down the different businesses that were in Lincoln City that I grew up with, and a lot of other members here probably grew up with. And I just thought that was good to share this information to other people so they can see that this was a thriving community and that people went to work every day. It just was. And then I listed here some of the professions of the residents. So even though a lot of them had their own businesses, small businesses, a lot of them still worked outside of the home. And these are just a list of those that I found that showed the residents the jobs that they actually had. And but they still lived in Lincoln City. And so I just thought this was so cool and interesting to be able to see this, that, there are all kinds of occupations here. I think I remember the guy that changes the switch thing on the train, the brakeman. I remember, because I lived beside the train track. So I used to look at that all the time. So here are just some memories of Lincoln City that you've probably already seen before. I was touched by them, to tell you the least. And I especially like the one about we were poor, but we didn't know it. I really didn't know it. I just didn't know it. We didn't feel it. I didn't feel poor, and people helped each other. They shared with each other. And that is the thing that I missed. And it took me to have to grow up to understand it. That was what I missed, that people don't quite do that anymore, but I thought this was really interesting and cool to share this with you. And then, okay, this is what it looks like now. And if you can see, this is all wooded up, grassed up, and so every time I look at that, I get a little bit emotional. I've driven through there and it still hurts my heart. It still does. It really truly does. So I wanted to give some thank yous personally to Ms. Doris Simmons. She gave me the information on Antioch Free Will Baptist Church. Mr. Thomas Stewart, he gave me the information on Faith Tabernacle Holy Church. And Mrs. Nadine Grady gave me the information on St. Peter Church of Christ. Okay, I got that right. Did I mess this up again? And I wanted to thank my cousin who is no longer with me. Her name was Esther Jenkins Everett. And she and I used to have conversations about Lincoln City. And she encouraged me to share and talk about and research more on Lincoln City. So I just wanted to put that out in the universe, that I appreciate her in giving me that background and backbone to do that. There's 2 more slides. These are just my references, and you guys don't really want to see that. But I did find this, and I thought this was just so cool. And it's an advertisement from the 1928 Hill City Directory. And it was Princeton College advertising for students. And then the People's Bank, which I didn't know for a long time that there was a black bank. Actually, there were two. There's one, I know there's one bank, and there were two. Oh yeah, there was a dime bank. So there was two banks. But I just thought that was so cool because we don't exactly get this in our history books, you know. So that is why that's there. And I think I'm through. And I have to tell you, I am not an authority on Lincoln City by any means. There are other people before me who know a lot more about Lincoln City, you know. I'm just sharing what I have, you know. And so, okay. Any questions? I'll try to answer best I can.
I have something to add. The Lincoln City School, we call it the airplane school. So you can add that because it's built like an airplane.
You know what, and I think, it had wings or something.
Right, it was built like an airplane.
I wish I could find the picture of it.
You can add that.
Wow, did you go to school there?
That was my first school.
Okay.
I'm really intrigued by the one of the first churches you talked about, when they moved, you mentioned that other churches came and marched in procession with the church. So I'm curious about the cooperation between the churches, the denominational, did people only attend one church? It sounded like you might have gone to a couple of these different
I went to all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think most of us did, because my dad belonged to Antioch. My mother belonged to St. Peter.
Okay.
So we kind of went, and I remember going on a picnic in the summer with Tabernacle. So I think it was just.
So very cooperative.
Yeah, I think it was the parents. It was the parents. They knew our parents, and they just took you know, they just took care of us. Yeah, so that was, yeah, we just kind of went from one to the other. They made us go.
Yes.
Anything else?
Can I have permission to take a picture of that?
Yes, of course, yes. Yes, you can. I just never seen this. I knew about Princeton College, I never seen it advertised.
Yeah.
And the People's Bank, when I ran across it, I'm like, oh my gosh.